He wore his age like a quiet badge of honor-creased eyes, weathered hands, a presence that moved slowly but carried weight. When James Whitaker shuffled into the corner store that afternoon, nobody gave him a second look. He wasn't flashy. He didn't speak loudly. Just an old black man in a faded army jacket, baseball cap pulled low, and a cautious step in his walk. What nobody knew was that 30 minutes later, FBI agents would be storming the local police station because of what happened next. It began with a Coke and a pack of batteries. The store was mostly empty, the buzz of a flickering ceiling light the only sound in the stale air. James stood at the counter, fishing coins from his pocket with stiff fingers, when the clerk, young, impatient, began tapping at the register, that old man. He asked, barely making eye contact. James gave a polite nod, then held out his ID with a crisp $20 bill. Military discount if you still honor that. The clerk squinted at the ID and scoffed. Vietnam. Man, that was forever ago. James didn't flinch. Still counts. Sure, the clerk muttered, punching in numbers. But before he could hand over the change, the door swung open behind James, and two uniformed officers entered. Boots heavy on the tile, the taller one pointed. That's him. James turned slowly, confused. Excuse me? You match the description. Elderly male, dark jacket, black hat, the officer said, approaching with a firm tone. We got a call about suspicious activity. James looked around. Suspicious for buying soda? The other officer didn't respond. Instead, he moved in closer. Mind stepping outside with us? The clerk was already retreating behind the counter, watching like he was afraid of the man who just paid him. James didn't resist. He'd been trained long ago to stay calm in moments like these. Still, there was something in the air, something unjust, festering beneath the surface. Outside, the air was warmer than it should have been. The sidewalk was cracked, just like the system that was about to break. James raised his hands slowly as one of the officers began to cuff him. What's the charge? He asked. The taller officer shrugged. We'll figure that out at the station. A small crowd had gathered now, whispering, recording. One woman muttered, That's Mr. Whitaker. He volunteers at the shelter, but it didn't matter. Within minutes, James was in the back of the cruiser, staring out the window at a town that no longer saw him for who he was. At the station, things escalated. He was led into a holding room, fingerprinted without explanation, and questioned like a stranger. The officers chuckled among themselves, ignoring the silence of the man in front of them. But James? He wasn't afraid. He sat straight, silent, waiting, because what the officers didn't know, what they hadn't bothered to check, was that James Whitaker wasn't just any veteran. He wasn't just some elderly man walking around town. He was a decorated intelligence officer who had served 3 decades in high-level operations, and right now, the FBI was tracking his arrest in real time. They'd been in contact with him earlier that day. When he didn't respond to a routine check-in, alarms were triggered. 27 minutes later, black SUVs would pull up outside that police station and the officers inside. They were about to learn the hard way who they had just arrested. The station's lobby was still and sterile, humming with fluorescent lights and a sleepy front desk officer tapping at his keyboard. He barely noticed the dark SUVs pulling up outside, the kind with tinted windows and plates you can't trace. 3 men and 1 woman stepped out, suits sharp, expressions sharper. They moved fast but quiet, no lights, no sirens, just purpose. Inside the holding room, James sat with his hands folded, expression unreadable. The younger officer leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So, you want to tell us what you were really doing at that store? James didn't answer. He didn't need to. Come on, the taller one added, pulling up a chair across from him. "You matched the description. You're not under arrest. Yet, but you gotta admit, you look like you've been through some things. Might as well be honest with us." James finally looked up. "I've been through wars. And right now, it feels like I'm in another one." Before the officer could respond, the door burst open. The station went quiet. Two men in suits stepped in, flashing federal badges so fast the officers barely had time to register the lettering. "James Whitaker is leaving with us." Now the tall officer stood up, flustered. "Wait a second, who are you?" The lead agent stepped forward. "Agent Lyle, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You've unlawfully detained a decorated federal asset with active clearance. That's obstruction." The younger officer scoffed. "Come on, he's just some old guy." "Wrong," Agent Lyle interrupted, voice like a blade. "That old guy served 32 years in Army intelligence. Top secret assignments across 5 continents. He built the tech that saved a dozen American lives in Kabul last year. And you arrested him because he looked suspicious." James rose from the bench calmly. "Told you you'd regret it." The officers looked stunned, pale. Agent Lyle turned to them. "Where's the footage?" "We didn't process anything yet," one of them stammered. It was a field check." The agent's voice dropped an octave. "A field check without charges, without verification, and without even checking his ID." Another agent pulled out a folder from his briefcase and tossed it onto the desk. Inside were photos, citations, and a federal memo with James's name printed in bold. "Your department will be hearing from Washington," Lyle added. "And if there's one more word out of either of you, you'll be the one sitting behind that glass next." James said nothing, but the fire in his eyes said enough. As they escorted him out, the younger officer tried one last time to justify himself. "We didn't know who he was." Agent Lyle didn't even turn around. "You didn't care who he was. That's worse." Outside, the midday sun cut through the clouds as James stepped into the back of the SUV, not in cuffs, but as an honored guest. The crowd that had gathered outside the station now stared in stunned silence, realizing just how badly the local cops had messed up. Back inside the cruiser, one officer sat down, burying his face in his hands. The other stood frozen, still holding the empty form he'd never finished filling out. The name on top? James Whitaker. The man they never thought to Google. The name they never thought to respect, and they had just been schooled in humility by the quietest man in the room. The SUV moved smoothly through the streets of Tucson, its tinted windows hiding the quiet storm brewing inside. James sat in the back seat, shoulders relaxed, hands resting on his lap. He wasn't angry. He had moved past that years ago. What he felt now was something deeper, familiar. Like a bruise pressed too many times, Agent Lyle glanced at him from the front. "We're sorry, sir. We got the alert as soon as the holding log hit the federal database." James nodded. "It's not the first time, but I hope it's the last." The woman next to Lyle, Agent Ramirez, turned around. "Sir, we're preparing a full statement to release to the media if you approve. We've also alerted your attorney and your veteran liaison." The mayor's office called twice. James gave a quiet chuckle. Let them sweat. The car stopped at a quiet government building tucked away behind palm trees and sandstone. Not flashy, just secure. As James stepped out, a uniformed officer at the gate saluted him. James returned it without hesitation. The building's doors opened before they even reached them. Inside, a small team waited in a briefing room. A large screen showed stills from the station footage. James's image was on display, sitting calmly in the holding room while two officers stood over him. The room fell silent as he entered. "Mr. Whitaker," the director began, standing, "we're deeply sorry this happened to you. We've initiated an internal review of interagency communication breakdowns." James held up a hand. "Save it. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to make sure it never happens again." The director nodded. "Understood." He motioned to Ramirez, who opened a laptop and turned it toward James. On the screen were security cam stills from the gas station. Grainy. Poor angle. But in one image, a tall figure in a hoodie could be seen trying to remove a license plate. Another image caught the moment. James appeared and spoke to the man. The timeline showed that the suspect fled just seconds later. "So let me get this straight," James said. "I stop a possible car theft, and I'm the one you throw in cuffs." Lyle spoke carefully. "The station claims they had a matching description, but they didn't run your ID. They didn't contact us. They assumed." James folded his arms. "Then they're not just incompetent. They're dangerous." Ramirez looked uneasy. "The press will want a statement, sir." James stared at the screen. The image of himself behind bars lingered longer than it should have. "I'll give them one. But not the way they expect." He stood and paced the room, eyes sharp. "I don't want a PR cleanup. I want a policy overhaul. I want officer training, inter-department ID protocols, federal vet flags triggered in real time. If a cop lays hands on another vet without checking credentials, they should be suspended. Period." The director looked surprised. "You'd be willing to consult on that?" James turned, his voice calm but firm. "I won't just consult. I'll lead it." Outside, the sun had begun to sink behind the Tucson skyline, casting long shadows across the concrete. But inside that building, something else was rising, a movement sparked by a man who hadn't raised his voice once, but who now carried the weight of every name wrongly accused, detained, or forgotten. As he left the room, his phone buzzed. A text from his granddaughter. "Grandpa, are you okay?" He smiled and typed back, "Better than okay." Just got promoted to something bigger than rank. He stepped into the hallway with purpose, knowing the real mission was just beginning. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the wide front steps of the Tucson Police Department. The city was just waking up, but a small crowd had already begun to gather, reporters clutching microphones, activists holding signs, and curious passersby drawn in by the buzz. The station doors opened, and out walked James Whitaker. No cuffs, no guards, just presence. Behind him, 2 FBI agents followed silently. They didn't need to say a word. Their uniforms and badges were enough. Camera shutters clicked. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers spread quickly. The old man the officers had arrested was a decorated veteran, a former military intelligence analyst, a man who had served his country with honor and been mistaken for a criminal on his own street. James paused on the steps, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. He didn't raise his voice, but his words reached every ear. "You know, when I wore the uniform, they trained us to assess, not assume. To investigate, not judge. But somewhere along the line, we've lost that. Not everyone with a hoodie is a suspect. Not everyone with gray in their hair is fragile. And not every black man on the street is a threat." Reporters leaned forward. Some live streams were already rolling. But James didn't play to the cameras. He spoke like a grandfather would to family that needed reminding. "I've been profiled before. I've been followed in stores, ignored in boardrooms, asked to prove my own name. But this time, they put me in cuffs, while the real suspect got away. And if I didn't have titles, medals, or connections, you wouldn't even be hearing about this." The silence deepened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. This is a formal recommendation to the City Council. Not for punishment, for prevention. Every officer in this city should go through federal-level identification protocol training. Every arrest should trigger a double check when a veteran flag is detected. And every department should remember this. Protecting the public starts with respecting the individual. One of the officers from the day before, Officer Daniels, stood off to the side, his face pale, his hands twitching. James met his eyes. "You didn't ask my name, son. You just reached for the cuffs. You thought you were doing your job. But you forgot that your job is rooted in justice, not instinct. I hope next time you remember the difference." Daniels dropped his eyes. He had no defense. The FBI agents flanked James again as he walked down the steps, past the cameras and out into the sunlight. But just as he reached the bottom, a small hand reached out. It was a boy, maybe 10, wide-eyed, nervous. "Sir," he said, "are you the man they put in jail by mistake?" James crouched down, smiled gently, and nodded. "Yes, son. But sometimes mistakes help us fix bigger problems." The boy grinned. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and join us for more powerful, real-world stories that challenge assumptions, fight injustice, and celebrate those who stand tall when it matters most.